Why is the color blue associated with boys? And why is the color pink associated with girls? And who decided any of this in the first place? Hey class, welcome to Abroad Sex Education, where we unpack the conversations about sex and sexuality we were never taught but deserve to have. I'm your host, sex educator, and guide to gender roles and expectations, Cin. And today, my co-host is Asa.
Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, possibly. Hello.
In today's study break, we're talking about gender roles, masculinity, femininity, and the social expectations we place on them before we're even old enough to question them. This podcast is a sex education resource for adults. We have real, inclusive conversations about human sexuality, pleasure, relationships, gender, identity, and more. Some topics may feel explicit or sensitive. Our goal is to break the stigma and offer the kind of sex education many of us never got. We're learning too, and we're bringing what we learn here so we can all grow together. You deserve to know what this is about so you can make an informed choice to listen. Or not. That's what consent looks like, even here. In lesson 2, I gave you the different definitions of what is sex, gender, and sexuality. Do you remember, or do you need me to give a refresher to the class?
I think a refresher would be good for everyone.
You don't remember the difference between gender and sex?
I think a refresher would be good for everyone.
So, sex is the biological attributes that were assigned to a person at birth, like their anatomy, their chromosomes, and their hormones. Gender is a social and personal identity that's shaped by culture, expectations, expressions, and individual experience. And a person's sexuality is who they are attracted to emotionally, physically, and or sexually. Easier way to remember is sex is between your legs, gender is between your ears, and sexuality is who you're attracted to.
Cut and dried.
Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
The next few weeks, we're going into our Pride series next. We're going to be talking about LGBTQ history. And you can't really talk about that without really discussing gender. Gender does play a huge part in that. So I wanted to make sure we had that refresher. And I wanted to talk about this topic as a mini break because I think it's something we mention here and there sometimes. I think it's just a good one to discuss.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially if you're going to gear up into a lot of bigger discussions about queer history or other things in the coming month.
Do you know what is a gender role and a gender expectation?
I don't know that I know a difference between those two terms.
Gender role is the script or role that you are expected to follow in society based on your gender, versus a gender expectation is the societal belief that you should be doing these things because of your gender.
The role exists whether or not you receive the pressure to be that role. And the gender expectation is the pressure potentially that you receive to be that particular role, you as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
You suffer from gender expectations, whereas the gender role exists whether or not you're in the picture or not.
Yeah. I think a good example is beauty standards in terms of like wearing makeup. There is a social gender role that you have to look presentable in a way. Essentially, there is a social gender expectation that women will make themselves look more attractive by male standards in order to get a date.
A lot of women tend to have the gender expectation that they look presentable when they go out and about, right? Through the use of makeup or dressing up or whatever. And of course, women like to look good for themselves, right? But a part of that is looking good for the other, looking good for the man who is looking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, let's be honest, I don't think very many men are held to the same standard of looking good, right? The visibility or the dressing up, right? It seems like you can't really argue about the amount of time that a woman spends getting ready, right? Wearing makeup, putting on clothes, like dressing up, getting the heels, getting the dresses, right? All that is a lot more work, I think, that goes into preparing for the outside world when compared.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of gender roles that women are expected to play in terms of preparing to look socially acceptable than men do. I don't think men are expected to keep their appearance up or to keep their youth. I think men are allowed to age for the most part. There are beauty standards across the board, But a guy, when their hair goes gray, they become like a silver fox. But women are not allowed to age. Like, a good example for me personally, I am starting to get white hairs. And that's something that I still struggle with in terms of like getting older. And it's because I know in general look young, but I also come from a family that like frequently dye their hair. Like even to this day, all of my family members have like dark hair, but they all should have gray hair.
At this point, yeah. Like everybody dyes their hair.
That's a gender role that I still struggle with overcoming. It's just this like, I'm supposed to be youthful.
Right. In that case, you had said that both your parents also dye their hair. Right?
Yeah,
Do you actually feel like there is a difference in
the women in my family do it more versus my dad has stopped. I think when it hit COVID, like my dad stopped.
Yeah.
He doesn't feel as much pressure to do it. I don't even think he still does it. Like the last time we saw him, his hair's still gray. So I don't think he does it anymore.
Do you think that is something that has anyone ever commented on your white hairs directly, or is it just kind of a perceived thing that you just have observed that other people dye their hair and therefore you should dye your hair or not have white hairs?
As a kid, my mom would always give me money to pick out her white hairs. And so to me, white hairs are just a sign of getting old in my mind, ingrained in my mind. I just found out from my friend who does hair that like when you pull a white hair, it doesn't matter because that follicle is always going to be white forever. So it doesn't really matter if you pull it because another one is going to grow back, which is annoying.
I had older parents than a lot of the other kids my age when I was growing up. They were not really people who dyed their hair ever or like colored their hair or anything. So I don't think I ever really developed an indifference, I guess, towards white hairs. But I mean, I get white hairs at my age, right? And like, I don't really do anything about them. I just kind of let them fall out or whatever.
It's one of the ways I think I still perform gender role because I feel that pressure to not look older.
Makeup has always been an interesting one to me because I will admit, while I do understand how much work goes into going and putting on makeup, I have a hard time in my heart actually finding the act of putting on makeup super attractive. Because to me, it's all about outward presenting, and I'm a very inward kind of person. I don't like to be outwardly presenting. And so for me, at least, it seems to me that a lot of the people who do put on a whole lot of makeup can be kind of guarded about their internal actual self, and whether that means like they're not willing to share something. I struggle with it because I know that genuinely there are so many women who just like it to do it for themselves, right? As opposed to feeling obligated to do it because other people find makeup attractive, right? Or that you look attractive if you're wearing a particular look. But I have had experiences with men who have expectations that women in their lives do wear makeup and are thrown off when women don't wear makeup, right? And so to me, it seems like I wish that there was more of a willingness to accept a woman who does not wear makeup personally.
Well, there is a common desire among young men to have a woman that looks natural. You know, they'll always just be like, I just want a girl that's like naturally pretty. I just want a girl that's naturally pretty. And women have done the thing where they show a picture of a woman and be like, okay, is this woman wearing makeup? And they'll be like, no. And they'll just give them a different picture and be like, oh, which one of these girls are wearing makeup? And they'll say a lot to the one that's like wearing eyeshadow, but in every single picture, all women are wearing makeup. What some men tend to think is natural is a no makeup look, where it's literally like still like the skin looks like really glossy or the makeup looks really clear and like they don't have a bunch of eyeshadow, but they maybe have like a little bit of mascara and then like a little gloss that makes their lips look fuller. So they tend to have some makeup on. Like I would say my no makeup look is foundation, a little bit of blush, and my eyelashes. My eyelashes should be a dead giveaway that I put makeup on because I use the biggest lashes. But for some people would still consider my makeup look when I do that a kind of like a more natural look, even though there's nothing natural about eyelashes. They want a natural look. They want a like
They want to be perceived as naturally
Yeah.
looking. My point, I guess I want to make is having seen a few different women go through the act of putting on makeup. I didn't grow up around with makeup. My mom never wore makeup. That was like not at all something she was ever interested in doing. And so it wasn't until I was an adult and I was like actually hanging out with female friends or whatever that were like, they were actually putting on makeup. And after seeing that process, it blew my mind how much time and effort goes into all the layers, all the adjustments, all the different knowledge of all the creams and the like serums and like all that. I'll be honest, nonsense. To me, it is such a burden on someone to have to go through that act. So I would like ask the next time that you're wearing makeup, if you are someone who puts makeup on, consider if you're doing it for you or doing it for somebody else. Because genuinely, it's like, to me, even the quick makeup look is 10 minutes. 10 minutes, you could eat something in 10 minutes. You could go to the bathroom. Like, there's so many other things you could do with that time. And some people spend over an hour with their makeup, right? Like, it's such a huge amount of your day and week or whatever. To me, that seems like something that you're not doing for yourself, to me.
There are some people that use makeup, though, to express the gender that they want. They express the gender that feels more natural to them.
Sure, I can understand that. That's a valid point. Yeah, definitely.
When I first learned how to do makeup, it was initially wanting to look pretty, but it ended up being more of a fun art thing. Do you think you were taught any specific gender roles or gender expectations from your family?
My parents didn't really ever have any restrictions or limitations on how I presented myself. They were very do what you want kind of parents. I don't think that I was ever told, oh, you need to dress a certain type of way. I think mostly decisions around what clothes I wore were made financially, not in any kind of frame around popularity or making me look like a boy or a girl or anything. It was based on what was affordable, right?
Mhm.
I grew my hair out when I was a kid, like a couple times. Like I wore really weird stuff as a kid, and I didn't look masculine. I don't think that I ever outwardly wore what I would consider girls' clothing as a kid. I didn't really do that. But I don't necessarily think that there was any pressure on me to look or act a certain type of way. And I think that that's not the same that I could say for other people that I know. Right? Like I knew plenty of other parents who did have expectations of their children or would chastise them for acting feminine or, not a particular kind of way. So while I didn't really receive that individually, going over to a friend's house and seeing a father talk to their son in a way that was very much like you got to man up, kind of do this thing, right? Like that was more the examples that I could draw from as a kid, but not necessarily in my own house. I didn't really exhibit a lot of the traits that I think a very typical masculine boy would have expressed, right? And I'm also a touchy-feely person, and I'm a hugger, and I have a lot of emotion that I would say from a very young age have been willing to like express, although maybe not as vocally. While I would consider that kind of vulnerability to be a more feminine trait, if we kind of look at it from the broad social standpoint, I don't think I was ever like negatively affected for being that way, the way that I think may have been different if I had expressed different traits. So,
Mhm.
how about you?
There's definitely gender expectations in my family. A lot of them have to do with how women are supposed to be. So I do think there was definitely a pressure to act more ladylike or in a specific way, or I won't attract a partner.
And that was how it was framed, is you were specifically told by your family members, oh, you need to look good because you need to attract a partner. See, that's interesting because I can't think of an example when my parents ever made a comment to the line of, oh, you're not going to get a girlfriend or you're not going to do, like, I don't think that was something that they outright told me, or if they did, I've forgotten. But it's interesting that that's like a reoccurring thing, at least in your family, about like, oh, you need to do these actions specifically so you will get a husband.
Yeah, if me cursing is not ladylike, like how am I supposed to attract someone if I'm not ladylike?
Rather than framed as, oh, this is a poor communication style or something more broad. It was very specific to.
My gender.
It's interesting. Yeah. I would love to talk to my parents and see what they think of how I was
as a kid, because I'm sure they could have thought I was gay. I can see that.
Yeah.
But
I don't think they probably cared.
yeah, I don't think so either.
When did you first realize that gender roles were socially constructed?
I think middle school probably would be my guess. I think primarily because it was coming from a historical context of, oh, well, we had hunter-gatherer lifestyles and there was a very clear difference of role in a society of men versus women because men would go hunt and then the women would stay at home, right? Growing up, both my parents worked, and a lot of the family that I was exposed to, most of those men and women also worked. So I didn't really see the connection between like, oh, well, you know, traditional man goes to work while the traditional woman stays at home, right? I didn't really get that as a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I really questioned society as much until college. I saw the differences in how women were expected to act a certain way versus men being expected to act a certain way when I was in college. What gender expectation do you think affects people the most?
The biggest one in my head is just career paths, right? I think that there is a very clear traditional mindset of only the men go to work and should be the quote unquote breadwinners or whatever of a family. And I think that while that's deeply flawed and has definitely been proven to be not necessarily accurate in recent years, with so many women going back to higher education and succeeding and graduating at a higher rate than men, I think that there's a deviation there that I think is still probably present in a lot of workplaces. And I think that probably affects the most people because if you are a man, there tends to be that pressure that you need to work more or that you shouldn't value being with your family as much because your primary role is to be the provider. Whereas for women, there's sort of that pressure or judgment in the workplace for not choosing to have children or to be working later in life. So across the board, I think it's the career pathways and our acceptance of women in the workplace, regardless of their specific role or industry. I think that there are many positions that have a stronger likelihood of being women focused versus men focused. And I think that that still indicates that there's a big gap there. What would be your answer?
The expectation for men to not express their feelings, to keep things all in.
You think that affects more men and women together?
Yeah, because women have to deal with the effects of men not expressing their emotions.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because men are not allowed to express themselves, that also shows up poorly in the relationships that women have with those men, regardless, even if it's just a friendship or a romantic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that affects people most. I mean, it's one of the things that leads people to go into the manosphere. It's a trait of an undetected rapist. You know, there's a lot of problems with holding that feeling in and letting it fester and letting it grow or only turning it into anger.
Yeah, I can see that. Like if I think of a kind of a hypothetical example of a man who cannot and has not had the opportunity to learn how to express emotions other than anger, regardless of whether if they have a particularly bad day, they're probably going to express that with anger to the people in their household, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that probably affects a whole hypothetical household that wouldn't be that way if that man had had the ability to express a different emotion, such as just generic frustration or, voicing vulnerability about whatever they're going through. So yeah, I could see that totally. Do you feel like there are things that you do that are specifically drawn from a gender expression or a gender role?
I like pink because it's a very feminine and girly color. I associate it with such positivity and girl vibey, you know. It's my favorite color, but I think it became my favorite color because of social reasons. I think I'm attracted to this color because it's associated with girliness.
Right.
Do you know why pink is considered a girly color?
I think you told me before, but I don't actually remember the history.
Okay, so I'll tell you the history really quick. We can't pinpoint it completely, but there are two theories to why pink is associated with girls and blue is associated with boys. So in the mid 18th centuries, babies didn't wear pink or blue to define their gender. All babies wore white cotton dresses for the ease of changing diapers, even boys. In the 20th century, that's when pastels started coming into fashion, but it was different. So during this time, it was a general rule that pink was for boys and that blue was for girls. This is a quote from a Department Trade publication in 1918, but it said, the general accepted rule is pink for the boys and blue for the girls. The reason that pink, being a more decided and strong color, is more suitable for the boy, while blue, which is more delicate and dainty, is prettier for the girl. So there was a general acceptance that boys wore pink and girls wore blue. The 1940s is when a shift happened where pink started getting associated with girls and then blue started getting associated with boys. Do you remember what big thing was happening around the 1940s in the United States?
I do not.
So World War II was
Right.
around the 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
So in the 1940s, the men were off to war. Women started doing the jobs that men were gone from, right? That's why we had Rosie the Riveter. Rosie the Riveter was the American character built for advertising to promote women to work while men were at war. It's an interesting thing, too, because women were expected to stay home, right? And then now Rosie the Riveter comes, and now that's a social expectation. It's like, okay, now that the men are gone, you have to work too. Women started getting jobs and realizing they could work, and they were able to make their own money. That's when they started to have the quote-unquote rise of the new woman, which is a stereotypical figure of a masculine woman who is educated, has a career, works in a male field as a result of World War II, and did radical things like riding bikes and wearing pants.
Mm.
So, because pink was a masculine color, companies that were trying to market clothes towards women started making them pink. And that's how pink became a color associated with femininity. That's one of the things that they think shifted.
Possible causes.
Yeah. The second thing that could have potentially been in World War II, the Nazis would use an upside down pink triangle to identify gay men in concentration camps. And people in the concentration camps who were gay would get a pink triangle on their clothes. That is one of the reasons why there's a triangle in the pride flag today, because it's to reclaim the triangle symbol.
Right.
That's why also when we went to Amsterdam and the homo monuments had 3 different triangles.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because it's for all the LGBTQ folks who were persecuted during World War II in the concentration camps.
Right. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's how pink got associated with women and blue got associated with boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super interesting.
As a society, we tend to view gender as very either masculine or feminine, even though I think everyone is a combination of both.
Right, I would agree with that. I think it's always going to be some level of a spectrum.
Yeah. When a person is trans, it is a person whose sex doesn't align with their gender experience. And then there's also people who are non-binary. There's also people who are non-binary that do not feel like they are one over the other. I think that gender is more fluid, and I don't think people will ever be 100% masculine all the time, and then 100% feminine all the time.
The weird thing to me that makes it so difficult for me to think about this is that masculine and feminine, by definition, are social constructs. What is masculine is determined by society. We decide collectively that an action is associated with a male or female. But male and female is a biological trait, right? But we, society, have added layers of, well, this is how someone who is biologically male should behave.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what masculine is. It is a layering that we've determined should be applied. So when we're talking about a spectrum of, or we're talking about categorizing a person as, oh, well, they only are feminine or they only are masculine, those are, again, social constructs that we have decided to arbitrarily associate with biological traits of an individual. So saying that someone cannot be on a spectrum between these two socially defined categories is really arbitrary to me, because every individual is going to exhibit their own traits and how they interact with the world. And that has nothing to do with whether society cares or not about whether those traits are categorically masculine or feminine. I can't fathom the idea that any individual person would exhibit every single trait ever defined by society in one society. Like all societies? We're talking about every single society in the world? No, not every culture views all traits the same, masculine or feminine. There's a huge breadth of differences when you look at different countries and how they act, right? Of course, there's some broad strokes things here and there, but it should illustrate that there is differences depending on where you come from or where you live, right? And so that should indicate, oh, it is the society around you that's telling you this is a trait that should be only ascribed to masculine people. What's a masculine person? It's an arbitrary definition of traits. So what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything, right? You should be allowed to exhibit whatever traits make you feel like the person you are, regardless of whether they are called or labeled masculine or feminine.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, to me, it's very difficult to look at traits that are traditionally viewed as masculine or feminine, because like we've even had changes in our own history where we've pivoted or deviated from what are the defined norms for these groups, right? So it's all arbitrary when it really comes down to it.
Why do you think people feel threatened when others break gender norms?
I think this is really interesting because to me, it shows somebody who has lived a life where they're extremely structured, maybe hasn't ever experienced a way in life that doesn't ascribe to every single bullet point on their list. So if I only experience one quote unquote society, a group of collection of people and ideas, and that society tells me I need to act this specific way because of my biology or because of the way that I was born or whatever, that tells me that is not a particularly worldly person.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as you are put in a situation where you bounce off of some other person who is, again, an individual who happens to behave differently than that bullet point list of your society that you came from, your pocket of the world, if you don't exactly match all of that and you think that person is weird or a heathen or unconstitutional or whatever, it only indicates that that person who is making that judgment on that other person hasn't been exposed or has been conditioned year after year after year after year or whatever duration of time to only think of the world as a possible view that can come from that angle.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand and sympathize with the fact that, like, if you have only lived a certain type of way and somebody you encounter in your life appears to break all reality that you've ever experienced because they say something like, I am a woman, when they outwardly display to every bullet point that you've experienced as a man, that doesn't make sense to you. It's probably hard to compute, right? And unless you have heard that exposure to have you question your own reality about what you learned from your society, the people in your life that taught you how to live and look at the world, you may not register that person as telling the truth. You may not actually understand what they're saying or empathize with the person because all you can think of is, well, that's not the way that I saw this person behave in accordance to what everyone told me the way someone should behave.
Mm-hmm.
And so it puts a lot of pressure on that person who is acting in a way that deviates from what typical society looks like, because now all of a sudden you have to defend yourself. Now you have to say, oh, well, I really am this way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very challenging. That's a very challenging position to hold to try to defend yourself constantly against a larger society of people who don't see eye to eye with that, or are so set in their ways that they're unwilling to accept the possibility that they may be wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lack of empathy to see things from a different perspective. But I also think it's a lack of education because it's a fear of the unknown, fear of the enemy. And historically, gay men, trans women, lesbians have had to live their life in the shadows for a long time. They become an easy target because they're a minority, especially trans people as this like big bad wolf because they are not subscribing to the gender expectations that are set from society because they are not only questioning them but saying, hey, this doesn't feel right to me. And then they get attacked because, well, what do you mean? It feels right for everyone else, so shouldn't it feel right for you? And that's not fair at all. Like,
Right.
I think it all stems from a hatred of women. The men who hate women also tend to not like gay or trans people, and especially trans women, because women are already women and they hate women. They're scared of gay men because the men like other men, and then some of them tend to act feminine. Why would you want to act feminine when you have the opportunity to be a man? And trans women are women who were originally assigned male at birth, but their gender is a woman. But those men who feel threatened by that are like, why would you give up being a man to be a woman? So that's why they don't want to believe in exist, because why would you deviate from being a man?
Mm-hmm.
You know? So I think it stems from a hatred of women.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's really hard for me to understand because it seems to me like it's a chicken and the egg situation, right? Like when I think about some of the examples that we've talked about people who have entered into the manosphere and they're willing to do all of these terrible acts towards women because of this external pressure that forced them into this space, right? Some experience caused them to view women in a negative light and
Or
their
femininity.
view femininity as in a negative light. Sure, yeah. And so there's some disconnect there of I have experienced something either by someone teaching me something or by my own experience that causes some kind of negative association with femininity. And then if I can somehow take that experience, even if it's just an elder figure, authority figure, somehow telling me, oh, this is how you should act. And now I've had that little seed and I generalize that across all women, gay men, trans women, right? I've made such a leap, right? I've made such a leap to categorize all of these individuals as people that I can't interact with or I don't agree with or not in my life, like, oh, they can do what they want, but it's not, not for me, that kind of response. I have a really hard time understanding the logic that gets you to that point, unless it comes from a source of, I didn't personally ever experience this with anyone in my life, and it's so foreign to me, it's so different to me that I haven't had anyone that can actually like talk with about this and have them understand or learn me, right? Learn me in such a way that I can understand this perspective. And that seems to be a disconnect to me with a lot of people who tend to have those kind of one-off, opinions about, oh, well, I don't want trans people to enter my bathroom or whatever, right? And how that becomes such a hot button issue is that then you have politicians who, let's be real, a lot of politicians, their only goal is to work the system for their own personal benefit, right? So if you can benefit from a system that has separations of individuals and categories of people, and you can win by pushing one of those categories down so the other category lifts you up, you're gonna fucking do it because why not? It's a self-serving act. You might as well, press the button that pushes you towards success, right? And to me, that's the issue, is that like so many times our politics and our higher levels of society make choices that alienate huge groups of people, and then the rest of the public looks to those people as the guidance and says, well, great, like we can see there's all these policies that are being issued that clearly negatively affect this other group of people, well, there must be something wrong with the group of people. It's very troubling to know that there is that kind of cyclical effect of society in that way.
If gender expectations disappeared tomorrow, how differently do you think people would behave?
I think that if everyone could just kumbaya figure out how to see other people as just a collection of traits that are expressed by that individual person, as opposed to whether or not society tells them that they should act a particular way or not, I think that everybody generally would have an easier time coexisting and just recognizing that, oh, well, that person is acting that kind of way because they want to act that way. End of sentence, full stop, right? Not because there's something flawed about their person or because they're wrong. I don't expect that would ever happen, right? I think that there's just a fundamental human mistrust of those we don't know. And like you said, the fear of the unknown, right? And if no one's ever exposed me to or taught me how to interact with someone who's very different from me, and my worldview is so insular that I've never experienced that, it's really hard to break that down. It's really hard to shift that. So my best advice, I guess, to get to that state is to have lots of conversations with people and listen to really good publicly available podcasts and media that is not AI generated and is actually willing to talk about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that is it. Again, the reason that we brought this up is because in the next few episodes for our Pride celebration, we are going to be looking at the history of the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to kind of learning some stuff about history.
We'll get into it, so that'll be fun. That's it for today's episode. If you have any questions about human sexuality, you can submit them anonymously using the link in the description. Follow the show for future lessons, because the best way to destigmatize sex is to talk about it. And if you want to continue the conversation, join the newsletter and grab the Essential Sex Conversations workbook. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you soon. Bye.